Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Winecast. I got a viewer suggestion to take a look at Pinot Gris and got to thinking this was a pretty good idea, since in addition to being a varietal whose fortunes have been on the rise lately, I think it's a pretty compelling and interesting grape with a long history and some remarkable expressions. So let's have a look. Pinot Gris is a color variation of the highly prone to mutation collection of grapes that we can just call Pinot. Genetically, Pinot Gris is virtually identical to Pinot Noir, another even more famous member of the Pinot collective. The two are so similar, in fact, that in terms of appearance, they can only be distinguished based on the color of the berries, since their leaves and vines appear identical. What color are the berries? They can run across a spectrum from a sort of bluish slate gray color, hence its name, to a pinkish red-brown. As you can see in this picture, with the more darkly tinted Pinot Noir on the left, the Pinot Gris in the middle, and the lightly colored Pinot Blanc, another member of the collective, to the right. Like many, many wine grapes, this grape has at least a couple dozen synonyms that it goes by in various regions, but it pays to know that in Italy it's also known as Pinot Grigio, that in Germany you might find it going by either Grauburgunder or Ruhlander, and that in Hungary, a region where it has a long history, it hails as Szürke-Barát. The color mutation that distinguished this grape from the other members of the Pinot collective probably happened sometime during the Middle Ages in Burgundy, where the grape was originally known as Fromenteau. From there, it made its way by the 1300s to Switzerland, and then to Germany and Hungary, and it was from Hungary that it made it to one of the regions that's most famous for it, Alsace. The fact that Hungary was the previous stop for this grape before it came to Alsace helps explain why Alsatian varietal bottlings of this grape were labeled as Tokaj d'Alsace up until the early 1990s. By the 1500s, when our grape made it to Alsace, Hungarian Tokaj was enjoying a great deal of renown as a wine style, and it's likely that promoters of this grape in Alsace wanted to cash in on Tokaj's popularity by connecting it to the newly arrived Pinot Gris. A few centuries later, as Hungary was making plans to join the European Union, a new name for this wine would have to be thought up so as not to interfere with Hungary's use of the name Tokaj for a wine region and a style within that country. From 1993, Alsatian Pinot Gris were labeled as Tokaj Pinot Gris, and then any reference to Tokaj for Alsatian Pinot Gris was phased out by 2007. It's worth noting before we move on that Pinot Gris was historically very important in Champagne, and was, in fact, one of the major varietals grown in the area, along with Gouais Blanc and Gouais Noir, before the arrival of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay to the region. Though its fortunes have declined in Champagne over the last 2 centuries, it's still one of the 4 permitted minor varieties, along with Arbonne, Petit Meslier, and Pinot Blanc, that can be used to make Champagne, along with Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Pinot Meunier. The most recent data I have, from 2010, ranks it as the world's 19th most planted varietal, a huge step up from a decade earlier when it was ranked at 44th most planted, and from a decade before that when it didn't make the top 50. This growth represents a huge upswing in popularity that this grape saw during the mid-2000s when, unfortunately, a particularly light, easy-drinking, inoffensive, and remarkably uninteresting expression of this grape became the it drink of the decade. As of 2010, the grape's major plantings were in Italy, especially in the 3 northeastern regions that make up the Triveneto or Tre Venezie. There are significant plantings along the west coast of the United States, as well as throughout Germany, with the largest plantings in that country being in the Rheinhessen, Baden, and Pfalz. In Australia, there are very large-scale plantings in regions like Riverina and New South Wales, but smaller plantings in regions like Tasmania have been gaining a reputation for quality. And there are also plantings throughout France, but the largest and best-renowned plantings are in Alsace. In 2000, a decade earlier, though, the top 3 plantings were in Italy, Germany, and France, with the US and Australia being much more minor players in the Pinot Gris game. And it should be recognized that while both the US and Oz can produce some great Pinot Gris, these 2 countries are responsible for a lot of the lackluster PG that's been filling bottles since the turn of the millennium. At the risk of overgeneralizing, there are 2 broad styles in which Pinot Gris is made, each called by the region most famous for it. The first and most highly regarded is the Alsatian style, with the Pinot Gris produced there really being very unique. Pinot Gris does so well in Alsace that it's considered one of the 4 noble or highest quality producing grapes in the region, along with Riesling, Gewürztraminer, and Muscat. Why does it do well in Alsace? Lots of reasons, but you can't overlook the combination of warm, heat-retaining soils available there, along with the long hang times in a dry climate thanks to the rain shadow of the Vosges Mountains that Pinot Gris can get there and that produce a particularly powerful and rich wine that's famous for an unctuous or oily character. When grown in these conditions, Pinot Gris expresses toward the tropical end of the fruit spectrum with notes of ginger and honey as well. The Alsatian style has traditionally been dry, but more off-dry examples are popping up, and, unlike a lot of Pinot Gris, these deep and complex wines can even age a bit. The so-called Italian style, by contrast, is a lighter expression with more leanness and crispness on the palate and less of the oily, fatty character than the Alsatian style. The fruit character also tends away from the tropics and toward the tree fruits, with apple, pear, and citrus being important notes. The best thought of examples of this style are from the hilly areas of Tre Venezia, the Alto Adige, Trentino, and Friuli Venezia Giulia, with PGs from these areas, especially the latter, sometimes expressing with the same kind of power that Alsatian ones do. Less highly regarded is Pinot Gris from the flatter Veneto plain, often released as an IGT wine. And while some examples of this PG can be very solid, good bargains for the money, a lot of it falls into the same category as the uninspiring stuff being churned out of Australia and the US. These two styles aren't based on hard, fast rules, and, as Friuli Venezia Giulia shows, the line between them can get blurred. But there's enough distinction between them that when New World producers label their PG wine with either the French term or the Italian, that's sometimes, note I said sometimes, meant to be a signal to consumers of what style they can expect in the bottle. I always like to end these varietal casts with some recommendations on where to start if you want to try this grape for the first time or just want to try more. But it seems these days it's hard to find a region where PG isn't planted, and it would be hard to do an impartial and thorough survey of all the possibilities. So here's my fairly opinionated guide to how to approach this grape. First, start with Alsace. That, in my opinion, is where the best Pinot Gris in the world is made. Yep, I love me some big, fat, oily PG, and this is where to find it. That said, don't pass up northern Italy, including some of the bargains you can find in the Veneto, but there, as in the US and Australia, do your homework and find out what you can about who the really quality-minded producers are. Germany's got a lot of this grape, with the largest plantings being in the Rheinhessen, Baden, and Pfalz, and those are good places to start. Pinot Gris is all over the New World, and you'll find some good stuff in the US, Australia, and New Zealand, among other places. But I have to confess a real soft spot for the stuff coming out of Oregon that tends to be made, quelle surprise, in the Alsatian style. So I recommend you check out Oregon PGs first if they're available to you. Finally, this grape has a long and important history with Hungary, where it goes by Szürke-Báráty, and there's an effort there to do interesting things with this grape, so if you can find Hungarian Pinot Gris, give it a spin. Thanks for joining me for another Winecast. I hope this one made Pinot Gris a little less mystifying and more accessible for you, and if it did, please let me know by liking and subscribing if you haven't already. And, as always, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. I'm your host, the Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.